Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here and not listening to President Barack Obama. I know where I would be. Oh, I'm just kidding. I figure half of the room works for my lovely guests today, and the other half might have not voted for him. I don't know, or just don't like lines. So welcome to Fixing Frankenstein, how to re-architect and rationalize your platform. You're not going to get as much technical information as that title suggests today, but I'm happy to chat about that after the fact. If you get scanned, we will send the deck out, and so it's more of a philosophical conversation about how to deal with the sort of monster that we can sometimes create when we get Salesforce in the environment in a multiple in a number of ways and in a less sort of planned implementation or a highly customized implementation. We'll talk a little bit about the reasons that Frankenstein sort of shows up. But first, let me introduce my lovely participants today. So thank you very much for joining me and also not being at the keynote. My name is Joanna Kuiper. I sort of look after our offerings and our methodologies and our practices at Blue Wolf. I have been with our company for about 8 years, but I've been in tech for about 20-something, although let's pretend I'm not that old. I have a history in enterprise architecture, and I've done solution architecture, business architecture, and data architecture in my career. And so this topic is one of my very favorites. And next to me, I have the lovely Rochelle Simmons.
I'm with Emeritus. We're an insurance company in Nebraska. We sell life annuities, disability, dental vision, a lot of lines of businesses, hence a lot of instances of Salesforce. So we had multiple instances of Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud, couple CRMs, throw in different marketing automation suites. So we had the Frankenstack of technologies as well. So really excited to talk today about it because untangling the mess is a lot of fun and rewarding when you get your company on a better path.
And Adam Graham.
First of all, thank you guys for coming, and it's nice and exciting to see a full room and a lot of happy faces this morning. So I'm with an organization called Next Step. We're based out of Oklahoma, and we're a PEO, which means Professional Employer Organization, and I'm sure most of the people in the room have no idea what that means. So we work with small to medium-sized businesses and handle a lot of the employer-related activities that they just didn't go into business to do, like payroll, benefits, HR, workers' compensation, so they can focus on their core business. There's a handful of Frankensteins that we found ourselves in through our Salesforce journey and implementation. And to some degree, I think that we were talking about this earlier this week. No Frankenstein in your tech stack is probably like Nirvana. It just doesn't really exist. But the biggest one that we found is good intentions, but kind of found ourselves in a mess with two CRMs. So we had Salesforce initially just for our sales organization, and then we had another CRM that was very industry specific that we used for pricing and back office management. And those two systems didn't talk, they weren't integrated in any way, and created a whole lot of inefficiencies. And we kind of had a similar mess for our clients, which is a separate Frankenstein I'm not going to touch on today. But it's a fun topic. I'm sure everybody in the room has worked through the pains and struggles of that.
Thank you. So our agenda today, Catherine found a picture of me to include, so I thought that was really nice of her. It's a little different than my blog photo. That's me after the concert last night. Why are we here? We'll talk a little bit about how you kind of end up in the situation where you've built a Frankenstein, when you decide to sort of pull the switch and undo what you've done, and then fixing Frankenstein, and then what we learn from that situation. And then we'll take some Q&A, although we only have 45 minutes, so I will keep talking this fast. The first, from our State of Salesforce report, there's a few reasons why we sort of figured this was an important topic for this year. And a lot of reasons that you'll end up in a spot where you've got a few different instances, a few different orgs, sort of a more Gordian knot of technology than you meant to have. One, obviously, reorganizing after merger or acquisition, or lack of reorganizing after a merger or acquisition. Legacy stacks that you're just trying to modernize or integrate or remove from your platforms. And then additional Salesforce clouds. So if you've started with just sales and you want to add service and marketing or any of the other sort of changes as Salesforce grows and develops the clouds to have more functionality, you may have customized something before that they then fixed in a later release or a different cloud or a new upgrade. And so just the dynamicism of the environment often leads to you having just a more complicated implementation or a more customized implementation than you meant. And all of those things tend to stack on or pile on to create this monster that gets sort of bolted together. And my philosophy is that you sort of need to understand why you got where you are to get out of the mess that you're in and develop a path forward and to move forward out of that. Some of that is technology. Some of that is the business reasons. It may be that you've ended up with an instance that the business started with and technology is taking over. And in the best of intentions, they've made a lot of customizations or just taken in some orders from the business to add fields or to add objects or to change a workflow for a certain type of customer. And you just don't realize that these little things sort of add up to end up in sort of a monster situation. So don't be afraid to question or confront the why of how you got where you are. This is one of those, like, just take a picture because I'm not going to read it slides. And we will, like I said, send you the slides afterwards. If you get scanned, we'll make sure we have your email address and send you this deck. I think there's a few different ways that you should consider how to construct. And I certainly have tried to, in developing our offers and how we go about getting in with someone to sort of implement their Salesforce orgs. How do you consider different things about how the org is going to perform, what Salesforce is going to do for you, and how it's really responsible for meeting the business goals that you have? We have a lot of clients come to us and say, hey, we want Customer 360. And we go, rad, that's a good thing to have. Why? And they go, oh, because it's going to change everything. I'm like, sweet, how? And they're like, well, the CMO has a different answer than the sales VP has a different answer than like the CEO has a different answer than the people that are actually using the tool. And so figuring out what that business synergy is, actually asking a couple levels deeper into how is Salesforce responsible for meeting these goals that you have for your business, whether it's increased sales or faster sales cycles or more diverse options for your customers, whatever that happens to be. And then how does your team need to collaborate? What are the people that are using the system doing together? What do they need to do in order to share customers? Are you making org decisions about do you have customers in common? Do you need to collaborate together? Sometimes there's a very good reason to leave orgs separate. If the product is super different, if the customers never relate, if the sales cycle is something that's completely separate, you may not need to have one org. But understanding how you want to structure and design that sort of footprint of the platform should rely on many, many topics. Reporting, also one of those things, you never really want to structure your orgs to be for reporting. We want to make sure that people get the right information at the right time to do their jobs and sort of take some action. But we often end up with a system that's like, well, the sales folks said they needed to do this, but finance needs all this reporting, so they're going to have to answer 85 questions up front before they even get to stage 3. We have to have a way to like have that conversation. It's like, well, finance, that sounds like a great idea, but you're not going to get, would you rather have some data or no data? Because literally none of the salespeople are going to do that. So balancing the priorities, showing really what the value of having that in the organization is, having those negotiations with the business about what is the right timing to get the best information. Really the reporting requirements need to sort of contribute to that conversation. And then obviously your organization structure. You know, do you have regulations that are about, you know, country-specific laws that need to keep data separate, or are there concerns in a regulatory environment that have to keep customers distinct and separate? Rochelle, tell me a bit about what did you run into as sort of what were the impacts as to why your Frankenstein came together?
So our situation arose out of the multiple business units being able to make their own purchase decisions, and we'd created silos of data. And although it is possible to work around and mine those insights and sales from one business unit to the other, or even from marketing to use separate systems, it's complicated. It adds a little bit of time. It's very manual in nature. And so in order for us to really gain insights as well as meet some of the regulatory concerns that we do have, it made sense for us to not only consolidate those marketing cloud instances, but consolidate those sales cloud instances. So that's really, where we recognize this is becoming a little bit of a business impediment, as well as taking us to where we want to go as an organization. Our customers are demanding, whether you call it, 360 or, the customer experience is so important. They really expect that you're using those insights. And we also wanted to be compliant with, are we accidentally missing an opt-out because it happened in some other part of the organization? So because of that, we really pulled all of those instances together, and I think, are moving the business where it needs to be in terms of we're one emeritus, we're one company, but we do have different product offerings and business lines that when we've got technology, it's really going to help us enable our goal, which is so that our customers and our producers and our agents can consider more of our products, not just think of us as that siloed offering.
And I think when we talked earlier this week, chatting about this presentation, I think the last bullet on this list was an interesting conversational point. And I find this a lot with customers that we're working with. The business sort of sees each other a little bit antagonistically, and one department or one product line may just sort of put up a hand and like, their processes are different, they don't understand us, life doesn't understand disability, we have to collect different information. But once you get into understanding really how that workflow and process works, the material differences that make a difference to your architecture and how your system is put together are less significant. And so you have to challenge sort of the business to sort of think about how they're similar as opposed to...
Right. They really are. And this is where, I feel like sometimes I'm the queen of questions because all I'm going to do is come back with, what are you trying to do? How are we trying to solve this? What do you see as, being the end game? What outcome do you achieve? It's like you rattle off all of these. But I think the more that you learn about what your business goals actually are and evaluate it a little bit more impartially. Everything I think about ends up being, a quick little table in Excel, because what goals are you trying to achieve? What do we have in common? How can we get there? For the most part, a lot of these different business units share 80 to 90% in common. Mm-hmm. So when you start to look at it that way, the cost value proposition was no longer there of, are you really that unique? So that was really important for us to really pull back away to evaluate what are your true needs, what's already there, how much more are you getting for these separate instances or separate types of processes, is the value really there? If it is, of course, by all means, that's a great use of the organization's resources, but for the most part, what we've really found is they weren't that different. Now, I'll still make them feel very special.
It's very important. It's very important. I think I found the one other thing about that is it's much easier. So pro tip, it is much easier for the different people in the business to sort of have a conversation themselves and like give them the space to talk about what they do and why they do it and realize sort of their beacon and reason for being is the customer and the customer experience, and find the synergies on their own with some prodding. So if you can create an environment where you're showing them how they're similar as opposed to telling them they're similar, the feeling very special comes from them going, hey, supplier of my technology solutions, we actually share this in common and I'd like to use some of the stuff they use, or they can probably use this. That's going to, adoption, change management, all of these things sort of change if they're seeing where they have synergies and you're not trying to tell them how their businesses are the same.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the things that we've done since we've moved to this consolidated instance, and we've got this clean slate now, and it was really important for us to have some governance and keep this from becoming a Frankenstein in the future. And now one of the things that we do is when we think about customizations or we think about that roadmap, our business partners come together every 2 weeks as part of sprint planning. And, before we take on, some of these features, or before we modify the roadmap, or before we even look at, which cases get prioritized to work, is they're all hearing that. And it does get that, business alignment. It gets that understanding of, was this really needed because we had something over here? It gets a lot more of that to be business-led and user-led than the technology delivery or the solution team, just acting upon these cases very reactively.
Great. Tell us a little bit about what impacted you. Of those reasons we've talked about that sort of lead to how you get to Frankenstein, what are the...
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we all good intent, right? And can I go do a quick survey of the room? How many of you have less than 250 employees? So it's a decent amount. So when we found ourselves in that situation, we were just really kind of beginning to scale up, right? And we were using Salesforce initially just for the sales use case as a sales CRM. And we purchased this industry-specific CRM that it was good, but the real use case that we were using there was for pricing and quoting. Worked great until we started really pushing it and started really adding more salespeople, more employees, and really scaling our organization up. And the obvious challenges, and I think that anybody in the room has probably experienced this when you have multiple systems that don't speak to each other, is you just have these reporting nightmares. So me as the sales leader, I couldn't really even see and manage the efficacy of our entire sales process because our salespeople were using Salesforce for a pre-quoting process, and they were using this other industry-specific product for a post-proposal process. And they were living in these two systems. So if I wanted to look at conversions across the entire sales process, I couldn't do that without a lot of manual work, and it was just becoming a nightmare. So being able to answer just very basic questions about the performance of our business became challenging. So that was one of the big drivers to push us towards fixing Frankenstein and actually addressing Frankenstein. And I think Joanna's point about awareness is half the battle. Just stepping back and saying, whoa, we had all good intents and the way we were doing it initially worked really well, but this has become a monster. The two systems also created an unbelievably inconsistent user experience. Salesforce best in class, the industry-specific product, good, but maybe 100 companies out there using it. Good for what its specific use case was. So totally different user experiences, which made it really difficult for me to onboard new people and train them consistently. And then our salespeople couldn't really see what was happening. Rochelle mentioned Customer 360. I couldn't see the full life cycle of the sales process, and our salespeople couldn't see the full life cycle of the customer either. Because a lot of the customer management was happening in this other system. So a lot of it's just the nature of two systems not talking, creating a tremendous amount of inefficiencies, and that kind of pushed us to look at it and say, this isn't working. We've got to do something about it, and we've got to fix it.
Right. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think there's something super critical about when you find that moment, as we've been talking about, of sort of when to pull the switch and sort of move forward. And there's a balance you need to achieve in the solution that helps you avoid the Frankenstein in the future. And I think oftentimes, and I've been using Salesforce for quite a while. It's been around for like 15 years, and I think I've been using Salesforce for about 10 myself, and designing solutions and doing architecture in that space. And while it's a SaaS solution, and while there's a lot of pre-configured content, and while the object intention and guidance from Salesforce is very good, as soon as you slot it into an enterprise platform, and as soon as you're integrating with other systems, and as soon as you are sort of using this tool like the rest of your technology stack, you have enterprise technology. And I think we often, especially in the past, which what gets us to today, have treated it as a little bit of a less of a technology solution, right? Like the original slogan was no software, right? Like this isn't software. But the fact of the matter is it's generating data. So it's participating in your enterprise architecture to some degree. And if you have this solution running transactions in your environment, you have enterprise data and an enterprise data concern. And so how do you make sure that you're treating those architectural considerations with the sort of merit they deserve with that particular situation? Like if it's just, it's something that's running on the side, and like our marketing people bought it and they're just sending campaigns out, and we don't even care what happens at it until the lead happens, and so like the sales guys are going to do something. That's all fine, but as soon as you're tethered and as soon as your platform gets robust, and now with Salesforce as large as it is, with the capabilities that it has and the number of clouds that are connected, it needs to be treated with a little bit more enterprise architecture concern. And I think finding the balance really is that conversation between, what is the right information, how do you get it at the right time, understanding really what your data management strategy is, what is going to get mastered where, how does it integrate, who really has the rights, not just to the object, but to the fields within it, right? Because that's when business units come together, like the sales guy wants to talk about, but I know their kids' names and what college they go to and blah, 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 and that's great. And that's data that maybe doesn't need to go outside of or be part of the master data around a customer. But the salesperson still needs it. It's still valid information for them to have to do their job. So, getting deeply into the structure of the objects and the data that's within there, and really drawing very granular and finite boundaries around what integrates and when does it integrate and how does that information provide value and to whom and when would you use it and do you need to sync it at all. So what's that core piece of data around a particular object or topic, and then how do you make sure that it's structured appropriately for the right users at the right time. So embarking on that rationalization project, whether it's rationalizing orgs or rationalizing your integrations or just restructuring the Salesforce that you have because you're running out of objects or running out of fields or you've over customized and you're like built yourself into a knot that you can't flex on, nothing can change, you're really slow to address business needs. The motivations that we see come up, again, sort of from our state of Salesforce, but also just from my personal experience with the customers that I've worked with as an architect, you've got a new business model or objective that's come up. Like all of a sudden there's a great idea that a new product or a new service or you've acquired someone, something needs to change and you've realized that like now you're in a spot where you can't flex anymore. Like I said, you've run out of those objects or you've sort of run out or a workflow is too tight or maybe your security model now has too many roles. I think I ran into a customer once that had like 100 security roles for sort of the same team. And I'm like, we have to step back from that and figure out what to do. But there's different reasons that you're going to end up in this situation with this structure. We have sort of two approaches that we work with. And I know that both of you sort of did the initial engagement of our sort of how do we construct a blueprint and get some governance in there. The first step is really how's the top down? And this is making sure that, to the point, the business is a part of this conversation. How is Salesforce meant to deliver value in your organization, and do your executives agree upon that? Because if an executive, meaning your VP level, your C level, depending on the size of your company and sort of who gets a say in how solutions are implemented and pays the bills for them. Understanding a bit of how the system is going to reach the targets that they measure and care about drives that conversation of the how. Like I said, like if the CMO thinks that Customer 360 is going to do one thing and the VP of sales thinks it's going to do something else and the director of the service center thinks it's going to do something else, they need to understand what the value is of all three of those things and figure out, okay, well, do I start with like a customer 87? Like maybe a 360 isn't exactly required to get out the door and to start making sure that we have the information that adds value. Nobody ever really needs 360, by the way, and I'm happy to debate that like over a glass of wine later. Super expensive to maintain. Don't tell Salesforce I said that. Business considerations. What's the impact of the customer experience? We often, and part of my job and really sort of why we've added the characteristics of executive alignment and customer experience to this upfront work is many companies go in and try to rationalize this out and go, well, there's a couple moments where the customer experience where things are really bad, like I just can't close or I just can't, in the service moment, understand what has happened. And so they'll fix pieces. And that ends up feeling also incredibly disjointed for your customers. And so you'll get in, you'll fix something will run really smoothly. The service guy now knows everything about every interaction that's ever happened, but for some reason you weren't able to turn it on for sales, or the sales dashboard doesn't include that data. And so one person now is completely enabled and the other person isn't. And so the customer thinks they can call anyone and they have different content. And so we want to also make sure that in the customer's experience, when you're rationalizing data and workflows and access to information and insights, that you're doing it in a way that doesn't all of a sudden make one point, like maybe the buying moment for the customer now is completely automated, but nothing else is. And so then you don't feel like the same company to them even. Then you end up with this experience that sort of confuses the customer. They think they can do one thing online. They should be able to do many things online. The second step, though, is bottom up. This is the stuff that anybody that's a technologist in the room would like generally do for any enterprise technology. So what are the technical considerations? What's the data you need to integrate? What does that really look like? Where else is it? What are the multi-cloud considerations? What is the footprint you're going to have in the future? How do those need to work together? Are you defining really the data and objects the same way for the business groups across them? One of the other elements we talked about, and something I think is really critical, and one of the reasons we see Frankenstein show up, is this organizational considerations and governance considerations. Oftentimes, we get clients that come to us and say, hey, we built this thing. We just had one poor person taking care of it. Like we had an admin. They were taking all the tickets in. Best of intentions. They were making a difference every day for users. And then one day we looked at it and it was just like we had 1,000 fields and we don't know why. And some of them were hit. We had like 34 different types of screens that would show up for a different type of user. And again, that sysadmin, that one poor sysadmin that was trying to run everything, was creating a Frankenstein without even knowing it. How are you going to care for and grow this platform in your organization? How are you going to constantly make sure that you're keeping up with the demands of the business? How are you going to make sure, to Rochelle's point, that you have people looking at these requests that come in so that you can consolidate and design the best solution for everybody around a topic, as opposed to just taking in, single orders from the business or working ticket by ticket to improve your system and solution, or even project by project. If you have a marketing cloud solution, but the team that supports marketing business solutions is working on that, and they never talk to the sales business solutions team. So make sure that when you're, talking about how to support the platform and the org going forward, that there's a way to consolidate. And make sure that there's at least some transparency into what does that look like overall with the solution, so you're not building little pieces and then sort of like once you uncover the hood realize, we have 10 ways to solve that one problem that we built just disparately. But back to you. So if there was something you only knew when you started, either in the flipping of the switch or in the building in the first place, or even now to avoid building another Frankenstein.
Think about a slide, Matt. Yeah, so there are a handful of things. One, Joanna mentioned earlier about how sometimes business leaders can think that, well, this little Salesforce instance, that's just our director of marketing, and I don't really need to think too much about it and worry too much about it. But then all of a sudden it grows, and the capabilities that's there really start to have a lot of downstream impacts outside of that single department. And when we found ourselves really starting to become aware and realize the pain and problems that the Frankenstein and the monster was creating for us, we also had to step back as leaders and senior leaders and executives in the company and say, hey, wait a second, we're not technical people. And I've got these tech people coming to us speaking a language that we don't really fully understand. And I know that's frustrating for the people on the other side of the conversation. So we really had to step back as leaders and take the time to bring in consultants like Blue Wolf and educate us and pick up our technical literacy, really, just so we could speak the same language. Joanna mentioned earlier this week about the expression she used was death by 1,000 cuts, which is really a gruesome image.
Sorry.
It's a gruesome image,
it's all Frankenstein.
but it's so accurate. So, as we had these two CRMs, we ultimately decided to consolidate. So we partnered and we consolidated and custom built everything out on the Salesforce platform, which was one of the best decisions we ever made. Very expensive, but also made us a lot of money and gained a lot of efficiencies and really took us to the next level with what we could do with our customer base too, down the road. But as we were fixing it, I'm not a technologist. I work for a small company, and I got to wear the technology hat for a lot of years and had to learn a lot. And I had a single person with no Salesforce administration background who was just taking tickets and answering requests and making everybody happy because they were solving everybody's problems every day. And everything that came in, they would just do. And before you knew it, we had all of this customization. So we're fixing Frankenstein and creating Frankenstein at the same time. Right. And that death by 1,000 cuts is so true.
And I think your point about when you said this earlier this week, the slow is smooth and the smooth is fast, like you hear the word governance and everybody's just like, oh, I bought Salesforce so I don't have to do all that extra overhead. Okay, yeah. But here's the thing, like, when you have a track to run on, like, you can just keep sending cars down it, right? But if there's no road, like, you can't, everything's inventing the infrastructure, and you can't invent everything all the time, right? So there's the just right for whatever your company and your set of instances and your org and your business design and the value you get out of Salesforce. There is a just right amount of infrastructure and governance and rules that allow you to grease the skids to go fast. That's what has to get figured out, so then you can rapidly sort of innovate or at least keep current on the platform and make sure that you're getting the right content out. I loved when you said that.
Yeah, we struggled with governance early on, very entrepreneurial business, and initially I resisted it because it felt like it was just slowing us down. But the quote is a consultant said that, and I think it's a military mantra, but it is so true. When you slow down and apply discipline to your decisions, and to don't let that death by 1,000 cuts happen. Right. And then bring in a lot of other people from the organization to help make the decisions, you slow down a little bit. But really, in the long term, you speed up a lot, right. and you prevent the Frankenstein from happening, mostly. Mistakes are still going to happen, but the best thing is by slowing down, you're really speeding up, and then the quality of the product gets a lot better. So I think you can flex. Governance may be perfect for your organization. You may just fit right in and it works, or you may be like us where it's really uncomfortable, but you can flex to make it work.
Right. And to your point, maybe you're going to end up with a little bit of, you're always going to be sort of building a little bit of Frankenstein. If business was super simple and like Salesforce just worked for everything all the time right out of the box for everybody's business, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Yep. You're always going to have a complex of sorts implementation of the solution, but those deliberate steps and decisions and sort of the right amount of documentation and rules and governance and keeping your data definitions clear and understanding why you've built different features in the system and who they're for and why a certain record type looks a certain way, so that you know when to turn it off. Or when I can't count the number of times I built a junction. I can't count the number of times I built a junction object to deal with the fact that you couldn't have a contact attached to multiple accounts with relationships about that account, 8-10 years ago. And Salesforce just fixed it 4 or 5 years ago. Anyway, so that eventually probably should get cleaned up, right? There's better solutions now in Salesforce out of the box for that, but we built things a certain way for a really long time to deal with complicated business needs that Salesforce didn't quite address yet, but it changes all the time. And so that's that whole poor one admin cannot keep up with I should fix the sins of the past, but also try to capitalize on the features of the future. That's just not you need to own the org in the right way that makes sense for your company and the speed of change that you've got going on.
I think you touched on documentation, and I don't have that as a point, but that is so key. So as you're creating Frankenstein and trying to fix Frankenstein, right. Just pushing your partners and your team to document. Document absolutely everything. And this is a lesson that we should probably apply to our business. I think it's easy to push for documentation when the project's complete, when really you should be asking for documentation along the way. And making sure that every step is being documented, because when you go back to fix it, if it's on paper, you can see what was done. And it's so hard when it's just living in someone's head.
Right. And Salesforce is great at self-documenting as far as the system goes, but that those reasons for decision-making and how you decide something adds value and why you built it in the first place, even getting that note in the comments in the solution are really important. Rochelle.
I'd agree on the documentation. One of the things that we do is take things out of email, because that one admin is now everybody's best friend in the organization, and they email Larry directly.
Right.
And
he has a name.
And now that it's not just Larry, so Larry number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, poor Larry's inbox, as well as all of the replies and things like that. So, this structure around submitted as a case, document responses within Chatter, a lot of the things that your users are looking for are education. It is not an enhancement or a fix. It's misunderstanding a field or a name or a label or how something works. So that slowing down just a little bit to, really understand what it is that our users need, but then addressing it in a way that is discoverable later, because in Outlook it is not, but if it's within the case or within Chatter, it is something that's going to help new members of your admin team as well as other users discover that. So I think that, that's really key.
And that's one other thing that's a great point that I didn't bring up earlier. There's the perspective of you have a new feature set and you're going to train somebody from a technology or a system, like push this button, this is how a field works perspective. But there's also the ops perspective. And you really need to have some pretty tight partnership between the business's why you fill this out and when you fill it out and what the right data is from an information perspective versus, it's a required field and it's all, alpha numeric and it has to be 8 characters. Like the how and the technical why is not the same as the business why. And you need to have both of those when you're training to avoid that sort of lack of understanding of that's what this field is for, that's when I fill it out, or why I have to do it in the first place.
Right. So some of the things that we learned as we went through our consolidation and connecting Marketing Cloud to Sales Cloud was really spending time and investment before we got started. In full transparency and honesty, we signed a contract with Salesforce ahead of really understanding our roadmap. That's costly. And that is one thing I would really, caution is, you might not know what you don't know yet, as well as having a partner. We brought in Blue Wolf a little late in that, and we recognized we, had committed to some things that we might not necessarily need. So really spending that time to evaluate, even if you invest in, whether it's a blueprint, a health check, that current state assessment, understand what you're getting into before you start. I know that's not agile. We all want to get in there, and we don't need that, again, that real slow, understand what you're dealing with before you touch it. The other thing that I think is important about, the contractual agreements that we enter, whether it's with Salesforce or any other company, is this stuff takes so much time. By the time you're actually using the capabilities you've purchased, we're 2 years into a contract. So really structuring, when am I going to get the value? When do I need some of those things? Are, I think, that's savings you can pass back to your companies, your organizations, and realize that value, because, this is expensive, and your business leaders, they just wanted those goals met. They just wanted those outcomes. They don't want to see, this charge show up. So, that is one of the things I think we really have learned in a costly way, and I hope that none of you realize that as well. The other thing is the ownership of our orgs and how we're staffed. Another thing that I think we've learned too is, what does it really require to support Salesforce? Mm-hmm. Because we did have the 2 men in a garage philosophy, and it is way too strategic of an investment. Now, one of the things I'm always bringing back to my sponsors that have to write this bill is, it's the software. Take that dollar amount times I want another same amount on strategic implementation, and then I want another amount on the team. So it's software times 3. Mm-hmm. That's your total cost. And are you really staffing the team and the organization correctly? Because if not, we all get in this very reactive, we're going to put out fires. We've got to have mental capacity to take time, assess, think, do it the right way. And that's resources. That's time, no matter if it's spent internally or with an external partner. But we have really had to grow the size of our Salesforce COE, not only internally, but externally, with Blue Wolf as well. And then finally, I think we touched a little bit on that customization. Is it really necessary for your organization? Are you building in a lot of complexity? The best way for us to do that was through the sprint planning process. And some layer of governance is needed. And I know everybody hates that word because it just sounds so bureaucratic and no one wants to be involved in governance. But, whether you could just call it, we're just putting a little structure around this, or informed decision making, like contact your marketing department, they'll help you come up with a better way to phrase this. But that's what it is. You've really got to have some way to evaluate that across all of your business units and your users.
Great, thank you. We have, so the Blue Wolf plug, I guess, is obviously many of our methods talk about how to do this, how to do it in an agile way. We call those sort of customizations black swans, and so you need to have a justification for what that is. And there's very non-confrontational ways to talk to your business about, like, hey, that's totally, like, I'm happy to customize something for you. Tell me the value it adds so that I can sort of, like, do the ROI and we'll, like, get it sorted. And most of them are just like, well, but it's for me and I need to be faster. It's like, okay, well, no, seriously, like, why? And so as long as you get into those 5 whys and start talking about the hows, it's those little one-word, detective questions that are really going to help you get to the bottom of the conversation with the users there. But I'm going to finally stop talking and invite any questions. And I think we have a handheld up here that we can pass around. Catherine? Right.
So I'm not looking at like merging different systems, and maybe this is a question for Rochelle. What are some of the signals that you've got a Frankenstein or you're growing a Frankenstein? Because we have some customizations around different business units, but is there anything in particular that kind of tips you off?
Manual workarounds. pulling data out of one system to another, just
Right.
that kind of inefficiency that exists, you kind of have to question why.
Right.
You know, is that necessary? Could that be done another way?
Right.
That was our first hint at a problem.
Did you have any, Adam?
I was going to say the exact same thing. So once we started having issues seeing what was happening to the reporting side of it, well, we knew we had a problem.
Yeah.
And when it became frustrating that I couldn't answer basic business questions, then it was like, okay, Frankenstein's here, and we've got to fix it.
Right.
Because it's costing us money.
I think our biggest sort of indicator of that is somebody goes, I can't change the system now to support a business need without a project.
Yeah.
Or I can't build I just can't get to this report now because the data is in different places. So as soon as you start to see like the underlying cause for I can't meet a business need is the system is too bound up, it takes too long, I have to undo something to do something, or I have to now add a new integration, or I have to understand a different piece of data from a different team and the way that they use it, or I've run out of the fields to add. Like, you should probably never run out of fields. Like something is probably wrong if like you're hitting these limits about like numbers of workflow, number of fields, number of custom objects, et cetera, et cetera. And so we find like when it gets to I can't move, you've probably got an issue. Yes, sir.
I was wondering how you measure success in all of this. Are you coming from a place where I inherited a HubSpot migration to Salesforce, done with no roadmap. One of the things that I'm asking the organization to go back and do is the creation of the roadmap to start it again and replatform and reset. So curious how you guys have thought about measuring success.
You want to go first? That's a tricky answer. And it's a tricky question sometimes because, I think it's not always easy to identify a clear ROI on some of these things. But I think it is, and I will credit Blue Wolf to this, you should go into the project with some specific KPIs in mind. So maybe, for us initially, and that was the situation I was talking about was like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. For us initially, it was just about adoption and engagement. Mm-hmm. So ensuring, that's a really easy KPI to manage, right? Are my users or all of my employees at Next Step actually logging into the application and using it? I can see that, right? And I didn't touch on, part of a big part of the adoption side is change management and communicating change. And I know we're out of time, so I won't touch on that, but. Tricky question, tricky answer, but I think you can establish KPIs going into it. You can get agreement on those KPIs across your leadership team, and then you can manage to them.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the Frankenstein you're fixing. So maybe it's that you're able to address projects go faster, or maybe it's that more user requests can be met, or maybe that it's that a report can be done, to your point, not manually anymore. Or, maybe it's that the adoption is higher. I think the important thing to do is define them with your business partners.
So you guys know we're over time, so...
Actually, I think we're over time. If you just want to come up and ask a question, please do. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.